What's the biggest secret you've kept quiet that could have ruined lives? My best friend confessed to me that while his then-wife was undergoing chemotherapy for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a 100-pound woman with a 12-pound tumor that had collapsed her lung, he was having relations with her younger sister. The sister had moved in to help care for her, so this was happening while his wife was passed out from treatment. He got his wife pregnant after she recovered and married her, claiming he stopped seeing her sister once he found out she was pregnant. The only reason I never said anything, despite being close friends with his wife for 15 years, was that I didn't want to disrupt the child's home life. They ended up divorcing 3 years into the marriage, and she still has no idea. Their little triangle had been my closest group of friends, but I no longer speak with any of them. The wife thinks I just flaked, and I miss her badly. It was a shitty situation, and I felt it was best to remove myself entirely, even if it meant losing most of the few friends I had. Story 2. My paternal grandfather was treated as an idol by his wife and children, and that entire side of the family treated the eldest males like kings, and the females like servants to those kings. This created an extreme sense of entitlement in my grandfather, father, and older brother that is difficult to explain. That part of the family felt like some kind of cult. When I was very young, my grandfather took a special interest in me, and I was far too young to understand what he was doing. My grandmother caught him once, and from that moment, I was treated like an outcast by her and my aunts. It took a long time for me to fully realize what was happening, but I always knew it felt disgusting and made me want to wash with very hot water. My grandfather did horrible things to me, and my grandmother was aware of them. The worst part of everything was that I could never tell anyone, not with the way the family hierarchy was arranged. I knew my mother would be the only one to stand by me, but that would only lead to more beatings for her. The rest of the family would revile me, call me a liar, use all their money to ruin my life and anyone who supported me, and perhaps even have me committed. I felt trapped. I adapted to this horrible life, eating so much that I became very fat, hoping no one would want me. Despite my size, I learned how to disappear. Walk so quietly that no one could hear me coming, move so quickly that I could not be cornered or held back. For 7 years, I endured abuse until I learned to adapt and escape. The old man developed Alzheimer's and eventually cancer, which consumed him. I grew strong enough to stand up to my father, and the beatings that my mother and I had endured from him finally stopped. Over time, I became more independent and was able to get both myself and my mother out of that situation. But growing up, I could never speak about the way I had been victimized because of the lives it would have ruined. Mine, my mother's, and anyone who stood up for me. I still carry some of the consequences. I struggle mentally, have a complicated love-hate relationship with men, and remain on the thicker side. Story 3. A friend I've known since 4th grade cheated on his wife very early in their relationship. At the time, they had been dating for such a short period that I didn't even realize they were going steady. We went to a party and he hooked up with a girl he met there. I didn't think much of it because his girlfriend at the time was someone he had only been seeing casually. Or so I thought. Nothing came of it for years. He married her 3 years after that party. Apparently, he had been foolish enough to keep a series of emails between himself and the girl from the party. It seemed like he had been playing both fields for a while. Years later, his wife found these emails. They weren't exactly damning, but reading between the lines, one could assume something had happened. She was furious and asked him if he had cheated on her. He lied, claiming he had met the girl at the party, but that nothing had happened beyond exchanging a few emails. Here's where I come in. His wife found out that I had been at the party with him, and she got me alone to ask if he had slept with that girl. Normally, I would have told the truth because I hate the idea of someone cheating on their partner, but I thought it through and backed him up. He'd gotten cold feet at the very beginning of a relationship he didn't know would go anywhere and made a terrible mistake. That wasn't the relationship anymore. It had become the center of his universe. He loves that woman more than anything. I felt that telling the truth would ruin both of their lives, whereas lying could allow them to work past a few emails and be happy again. He is a completely different person now than he was back then. I am 100% certain he regrets that time more than anything and would never make the same mistake again. I don't know. I believe in telling the truth whenever possible, but in this situation, I saw nothing but destruction coming from it. Story 4. I went to a bar with a friend. We had just a few drinks when a drunk guy came in and sat with us. He was clearly intoxicated and tried desperately to get in my friend's pants. She wasn't interested and ignored him, which seemed to make him see me as a threat. He started whispering in her ear, and later she told me he had been trying to convince her to go home with him. We ended up leaving, and he moved on to his next target. About 2 days later, I ran into a distant relative at the grocery store, and with her was her husband, the same kind of creepy guy. My cousin spotted me from a distance, and I waved with the biggest smile. He saw me and hurried his family along. I could see my cousin point at me and silently mouth the words, "That's my cousin." The husband turned beet red, and the look of pure fear in his eyes was unforgettable. Story 5. I came into work one day, and a female coworker had been using my computer to chat on Facebook. She went home and accidentally left her account logged in. Since it was my office and my computer, I ended up reading through some of the messages. She had been sleeping with her boss for months, and the conversations were extremely graphic. The boss is married. In one message, he joked that she had left 5 minutes before my wife came home. He and I are at the same rank, but we rarely get along and have not for years. I always thought he was a jerk, and this confirmed it. This happened about 3 years ago. We have had several heated disagreements since then, and the entire time I have known I could destroy his reputation if I wanted to. Instead, I have always chosen to walk away. He has no idea that I still have the entire conversation saved on my computer. Story 6. My friend's dad is gay. I have a friend, let's call him Bryce, who is gay, and was 16 at the time. He had Grindr, and on it, he found my friend Corey's dad. Corey's dad started flirting with Bryce, telling him that his age didn't matter, and asked where they could meet up. Corey's dad is in his late 40s or early 50s. As soon as he found out which school Bryce attended, Corey's dad stopped talking to him and blocked him on the app. Bryce decided it was best not to tell Corey. Corey's dad has 3 children and is married, and every time I see him, I feel bad for Bryce and slightly uncomfortable. Story 7. Back in the early days of the internet, I was one of the founders of a company that specialized in creating websites for recording artists. A very well-known artist who wasn't a huge celebrity in 2000 but still sold out shows gave me his personal digital camera to get pictures for his site. A few years later, he became famous enough to sell out stadiums. On the camera, there were several damning photographs, not just of him, but of his band and other highly famous artists. The worst for him showed him and a member of his band in bed, cuddling. You could only identify him through a reflection in a mirror, but it was definitely him and his blonde bandmate. There were other pictures of him giving the same band members shoulder massages and photos of them very close together. There were also a few photos of him without his toupee. Not very flattering. What would have destroyed him and his other famous friends, though, were the pictures documenting heavy drug use backstage at a concert and during a recording session. It was no surprise that when I met with him to discuss his site, he was sweating profusely in a dirty wife beater. I copied all of his photos to a CD and kept them for a while. I showed them to a few friends when no one believed me after I told them the story. Years later, I felt guilty and destroyed my copy of the CD. I left the company in late 2002, but I hear they still have the pictures on their drives. Story 8. I work at a business where the owners have been violating a law for several years. Let's say it is a car rental business, even though it really isn't. The law states that the company is only allowed to lease vehicles to people for extended periods, let's say month to month. These long-term leases are much cheaper than daily rentals. For example, $15 monthly versus $13 a day. That means the amount of money they are legally allowed to make is clearly limited. They have been breaking this law for a very long time, renting vehicles for $13 a day, sometimes even more when there are major events and people need transportation. They make a significant amount of money. God knows what kind of taxes they have avoided by hiding their real profits. They have been investigated a few times, but always get away with it by providing primitive, fraudulent documents that claim they only lease vehicles long-term. If I were to turn over the computer files that prove otherwise, they would owe the city a fortune and would likely be shut down. I have considered turning them in, or even blackmailing them. Why? Because they pay me barely anything. They pay me garbage. I probably will not do either, though. I am almost certain they would hire the wrong kind of people to harm me or anyone I care about. Story 9. Years ago, I was out with a friend of mine, A, and we decided to call up another friend, B, to see if he wanted to join us. He didn't answer the phone. Instead, his girlfriend, the mother of his child, picked up. She rarely went out, mostly because B was overly protective, but also because she often found herself in troublesome situations when she did. She told A and me that she never got out and wanted to stay out a little longer. We both reluctantly agreed, and she met us at my house. From there, we went to a local bar for a beer. She was already pretty tipsy. After finishing a beer, we decided it was probably time to call it a night, but she was insistent that she didn't want to go home yet. A went home, leaving me with her, which made things uncomfortable since the last thing I needed was a distressed and drunk girl alone with me. You might ask why I didn't just drive her home. I should have, but the entire time in my car, she pleaded with me not to take her home. She claimed B was abusive and that she never got to go out. She said that if she could just hang out for another hour, it would be better than going home. We returned to my house, where her car was parked. I got her some water and asked if she wanted anything else. That's when she became forward, telling me she had wanted me since the first time she saw me. I firmly told her I couldn't do that to a friend, especially since I had just come out of a relationship with someone who had cheated on me, which had been devastating. She was very persistent, though, and I found myself trying to back away as she followed me around the house. I couldn't just tell her to leave outright, though, because she couldn't drive, and I wasn't sure how to get her home safely. I sat on the couch and kept repeating no, over and over. She came over, stood in front of me, and suddenly pulled her shirt off, sitting on my lap. I told her again that it wasn't going to happen. She tried pleading with me, saying things like, "Don't you think I'm pretty enough? I won't tell anyone." But I stayed firm, responding that yes, she was attractive, but it wasn't going to happen. Immediately, she started crying. The shame hit her, and she stormed out the door. I half-heartedly tried to stop her, but honestly, I was secretly relieved that she was leaving. About 5 minutes later, she called me, crying. She told me she'd been in a car accident and was fleeing the scene. The situation had gone from bad to much worse. I agreed to pick her up and drive her home, thinking, this is my fault. How am I going to explain this to my friend? She was sitting there, looking at B's cell phone, which was on her lap and going off repeatedly. She told me it was just B calling, and that's when I realized he had no idea where she was. I grabbed the phone from her lap and explained the situation to him. Naturally, it sounded completely messed up. She was with me, she was drunk, and now she'd been in an accident. We agreed to fabricate a story to protect everyone. We told B that she had just left the bar and got into a minor accident. I swore up and down that this was exactly what had happened. He trusted me enough to believe that I wouldn't cheat, so he never knew the full truth. Over the years, I've distanced myself from her, keeping things polite when we cross paths. They are still together, and the secret remains intact. Story 10. I used to work at a chain hotel in the suburbs of a Midwestern city while I was in high school. It was a fairly easy job, but there happened to be a government-owned ammunition plant nearby that was going through privatization. The company buying the plant had many of their executives stay at our hotel during the process. One evening, a man in a suit came down and asked me to fax some documents for him. Late 90s, fax machines were still in use. I asked if he wanted to wait for the confirmation, and he said no, just leave it. When I went back to the office and started loading the documents into the fax machine, I began browsing through them. Holy crap. The pages I was sending detailed all the malfeasance, gross negligence, and environmental disasters that had been covered up at the plant. There were chemicals being dumped into the watershed that supplied a nearby town, chemical storage ponds with dams at risk of breaking, and much more. I could have completely ruined a lot of people's day by making a copy and giving it to the local newspaper, but I chickened out. I threw the documents in the trash and went on with my day. Story 11. While setting up email on my father-in-law's iPhone, a questionable text came in from a woman he works with. I opened the message and discovered a history of texts going back almost a year. They had been secretly meeting before and after work to bang. My mother-in-law leaves very early for her nursing job, so this woman would come by later in the morning to drive him to work. My in-laws have been married for 34 years and are very religious. My wife and her siblings had what seemed like a fairy tale childhood, and telling anyone would tear the family apart. The only reason I've been able to keep this secret is that I don't know if my wife could recover from finding out what a terrible person her father really is. I have thought about confronting him privately, but I have no idea where to even begin. Story 12. So many secrets. Buckle up. My parents divorced when I was 6 and life became a shuffle, visiting my dad every other weekend and going to my grandma's when my mom needed a break. My dad was far from an angel. He often got physically aggressive my mom and tried to convince her to have 3 scores with his best friend John's wife, Debbie. Meanwhile, he was having an affair with Debbie, which led to her becoming pregnant with my half-brother Jordan. John has no idea Jordan isn't his son. After years of enduring my dad's abuse and cleaning him up from puddles of his own puke, my mom finally divorced him. My dad sank deeper into drugs and alcohol until he was just a shell. I am the youngest of 4 sisters, and our weekends with him were terrifying. He would pick us up tipsy, swerve on the roads for fun, and even go around train gates when trains were coming. When we finally got home, he would watch Korn in the front room and invite his new punching bag, Brenda. No one deserves to be hit, but she was a lowlife who would fight and scream, eventually yelling at my sisters and me, begging us to call the cops. At our age, we were terrified and could never bring ourselves to do it. The worst day was when my dad scrubbed my neck with steel wool because she was upset with me. To this day, I have to explain the scars on my neck. Finally, I would reach my grandparents' house, which offered a little relief, except for my aunt, who was 40 at the time and, as she puts it, not the brightest tool in the box. She was married to Larry, a terrible man who to this day makes me shiver at the thought of him. He used to make me sit on his lap and talk about taking me to Disneyland. I cannot go further into those details. No one knows about that. There is more, but this is already long-winded. Story 13. When I was a sous chef, we had an open line with seating on the other side. There was a stereotypical rich executive who would always come in and sit there, usually with a different woman each time, some of whom were clearly high-class escorts. Then he started coming in with his wife and young son, around 5 to 7 years old, but still continued bringing random women. His wife seemed like a stereotypical trophy wife, and it was clear there wasn't much love left between them. The whole thing was almost comical. 2 people with so much money, yet so unhappy. What bothered me most was watching the man groom his son to be another selfish, manipulative human being. I always wanted to tell the boy what a terrible person his father was, regardless of his financial success. Story 14. My family, including myself, has a few skeletons in the closet, but I'd say the worst is the half-brother I wasn't meant to know about. The crux of the story is that my father got a girl pregnant and left her to fend for herself. He never told my mother, who discovered it purely by chance. Her job involved visiting households where children weren't attending school to determine the problem and find solutions. She went into a home in complete squalor and noticed that the child bore a striking resemblance to my father. After speaking with the single mother, her suspicions were confirmed. She completely lost it and went home to confront my dad. The household didn't even have enough money to afford decent shoes for the child. His feet were bleeding. For years, my mother begged and pleaded with my father to do something. An anonymous tip, Christmas presents, even a meal, but he wouldn't budge. When my parents eventually divorced, he finally contacted the child. By this point, the kid was in his 40s. Naturally, he told him to go F himself. Story 15. I was teaching high school. A solid C student, a good kid with not quite enough sense, came up to me after class. "Mr. Deradius, I was fishing this morning and forgot I had this in my pocket. I wanted to do the right thing." He went to hand me a pocket knife. Our district has a zero-tolerance policy. It's unclear what will happen to him. It depends on whether it has happened before, but it could bring some pretty bad consequences. The last thing I want is for this kid to learn at this point in his life that doing the right thing means getting thrown into the gears of a terrible bureaucracy and being ground into dust for it. So, I told him about the policy and what would happen if I were not the one standing there. Then, I slipped the knife into my own pocket, quietly wondering whether I'd get fired if anyone found it, and gave it back to him at the end of the day. I said something along the lines of, "I never saw this. You're going straight home, and you're never bringing this back to school. We are never going to speak of this again." I almost never break or bend rules. I drive 5 miles under the speed limit. I even felt guilty doing this, but in this case, I could not, in good conscience, punish a kid for trying to do the right thing. Story 16. One of my close friends' wives is in love with me. They have been married for years and have 3 children. She told me she would leave all of that to be with me. If that information ever came out, at least 4 people's lives would be turned upside down. It doesn't help that I am a woman, and I am 15 years younger than she is. Story 17. My grandmother always told us that her father was a firefighter who died of a heart attack at age 35. Her mother even described the exact street corner where it happened. I never questioned it, though it did seem a little strange that no one else in our family had a history of heart disease, much less an early death from it. When my grandmother was dying of cancer, her last wish was to be buried next to her father. She did not know where he was buried, so I told her I would help. After doing a lot of research, I discovered that he had not died of a heart attack at all. He had left my great-grandmother, moved to Los Angeles, remarried, and started a new family. He died there about 30 years after my grandmother believed he did. I never told her that her father had abandoned her. Her last memories of him were good ones, and she ended up in an orphanage after he left, so his actions had already changed her life for the worse. I am curious to meet his other family, but I doubt they would want to learn that he never divorced my great-grandmother, and that his next marriage was never actually valid. Story 18. When my father was arrested for a domestic disturbance, he had actually tried to kidnap me that same night. He walked into my room, picked me up, and asked if I wanted to go across the country with him. I was about 5 or 6 years old, so I excitedly said yes. Then, my mother came in holding the phone and told him the police were on the line. He put me down, and I never said a word about what happened. If people knew the full story, he could end up in jail. If my mother had not walked in at that exact moment, my life would have been completely different. Story 19. I was the other person in an affair, and I ended up getting her pregnant. She gave birth in December, and her husband still does not know. I regret the choices I made, and now I have to live with the consequences and the weight that comes with them. I had made a name for myself, so to speak, with the mothers of people I went to school with. I was a secret hookup for 6 mothers whose children graduated high school with me. Story 20. I once walked in on my best friend's wife with her good friend David. They were together in a way that left no room for doubt. Based on what I saw, they were doing things my friend has always said he and his wife never even come close to doing, which made it even more shocking. I have tried to bring it up with him a few times, but he's cut me off each time. I am fairly sure he already knows. Maybe they have an arrangement, or maybe I never should have seen anything at all. Maybe I'm next. Story 21. My identical twin brother and I are both juniors in college. He is extremely outgoing, social, a big fraternity guy who is always the center of attention and constantly surrounded by people. I, on the other hand, prefer quieter things. A small circle of close friends, picnics at the park, low-key hangouts at my girlfriend's place. Nothing crowded or loud, unlike my brother's life. One night he drank way too much and completely lost control. He got into fights, threw a television out a window at the fraternity house, and was caught on camera kissing another guy. For the record, neither of us has any issue with anyone being gay. Our parents raised us to treat everyone the same, and we share that belief. But the crowd my brother hangs out with is harshly judgmental, and his whole social status would fall apart if they saw that video and assumed he was gay. So, I did what I thought a loving brother should do. I told everyone it was me, not him. My friends and my girlfriend knew the truth and didn't care. My brother was stunned that I would take the fall for him. Seeing how relieved he was made all the jokes and teasing worth it. Twins, from the womb to the tomb. Story 22. I know for a fact that my mother cheated on my father, and I know who she did it with. I also understand that life is complicated and people don't live in a simple black and white world. I was young when it happened, and I don't know the full context of their relationship. As a child, I was angry and hurt. But as I've grown older, I've realized that life is made up of choices, and sometimes people make the wrong ones. It does not necessarily make them a bad person. It just makes them human. My parents divorced long ago for reasons unrelated to that, but my dad is still deeply in love with my mom. If he ever found out, it would crush him and devastate my younger sister. I would rather let him hold on to the good memories than ruin everything, just because I feel the need to tell someone. Story 23. I know a few things that would turn much of my world upside down if people knew. A few years ago, my family and I went to Cabo San Lucas for 2 weeks. My dad and I went out downtown to explore the nightlife. After being swindled out of $200 at a club, we wandered the streets and encountered an S worker, I was only 18 at the time, and I was scared, so I quickly declined. My dad, however, went through with it. I waited for 30 minutes at a street bar, feeling awkward, knowing that my dad had willingly cheated on my mom. I don't know if he ever told her, but this is something I will carry to my grave. My dad is a good man and works hard for my mom. Story 24. The wife of a man I know asked me if I would be interested in a one-night stand some time ago. I turned it down, obviously. Aside from the whole married thing and the fact that she was married to a really nice guy, she was in a very fragile emotional place at the time. I'm not sure how many drinks it took for her to feel drunk, so I like to think it was mostly, if not entirely, because of that. She and her husband are working through their problems, and as far as I know, she never actually went through with it with anyone else. I'm glad she asked me, because a few others in her friend group probably would not have said no, and now that scenario isn't hanging over anyone's heads for life. I think I'm probably the only one carrying some form of guilt over it, and I hope she was too tipsy to remember asking me in the first place. Being the person who could have potentially destroyed someone's marriage was never something I wanted, and it was not easy to carry that weight. I got a 2-year degree in 6 years instead of a 4-year degree in 4 years because my parents had promised to pay for half of my college education, and my dad was diagnosed with cancer in my last year of grade school. I didn't want to strain their finances or hurt their pride, and yet, if I told them now, I think it would devastate them. The upside is that I have no student loans. I paid as I went for my half, citing my well-known dislike of owing money as the only reason for my choice. I earned a degree in something I didn't enjoy purely because it seemed financially practical, so I could provide for the woman I thought I was going to marry. Music, art, writing. These would have been far more fulfilling than the practical joke of business management. At least with something creative, I would have been doing what I loved, even if the wages were barely livable. Instead, I have an associate's degree in something generic and relatively useless. At least now I can manage all the employees I don't actually work with. And then there's the biggest one. I almost ended my life in late high school. My dad's cancer threw our family life completely off balance. My sister ran from the problem by getting married and moving out of state. My mom became almost feral. If you tried to help or even give her space, there was no winning. To this day, I can recall the most hurtful thing she ever said to me, word for word. My dad became obsessed with strange pet projects and was angry most of the rest of the time. I don't blame any of them. Everyone copes differently, and they all needed support too. But by the end of the day, there wasn't much left for me. I earned my Eagle Scout ranking just before my birthday, which was an achievement, but also another intense source of stress I didn't need. Being in a church troop meant pushing through the ranks until age 14, when Boy Scout meetings ended because of church youth activities scheduled at the same time. So, I earned Eagle mostly on my own, under pressure from my dad, who I wanted to make proud. I almost didn't graduate from high school. A teacher deliberately sabotaged me by losing projects, leaving me with a 59.9%. I had to take night classes and spend months fighting with my high school counselor to get into a better class. Eventually, my parents had to intervene and support my decision to get a GED if the transfer failed. I was usually a quiet academic, nose in a book, so this experience was nothing short of a nightmare. I lost my faith for many reasons. God simply didn't make sense anymore. Prayers became lip service, sacraments a superstitious compulsion, and the church was just one more place I had to fake my way through to be accepted by the people around me. I became temporarily agnostic, the first step in my journey. Even now, I respect religious people because I understand the warmth and comfort that comes from believing in a presence that will always love, accept, and help you. I know how brutally cold life feels without that. If there was ever a time I needed a heavenly father, it was during the period when I felt completely abandoned and unheard. After years of failing miserably to approach girls without coming across as creepy or trying too hard, I finally found love. I accidentally poached a girlfriend from someone else, leaving him behind, and she chose to be with me. Seriously, I had been trying since grade 1 to court girls, which explains why it was so difficult. Finally, in grade 12, a girl I had admired from a distance liked me back. She was sweet, kind, and introverted, and seemed to understand and mirror who I was and who I wanted to be, a light in my darkness. After about a month of her being the pristine girl of my little Mormon dreams, she took me to hang out with some friends. I let myself be pressured into smoking what I assumed was tobacco with everyone else. I also ended up buying cigarettes for a few people, yes, over 18. That night gave me a sudden and extreme glimpse into the kind of person I had started dating. I had always believed that the beginning of any intimacy would be based purely on love and affection, and I was completely unprepared for the recreational and semi-public perspective that was thrust on me that day. This was the person I had seen as the only thing keeping my head above water. She was definitely not the reason I went out later that night to buy a bottle of sleeping pills, but after dropping her off at home, I could not see anything else left to hold on to. The store was closed. They had recently changed their hours from 11 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. I had a sudden, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" moment, called a friend of a friend, someone I had only met twice before, and asked if I could come over for a while. I wasn't sure why I chose her. Maybe because she was in a similar sort of religious middle ground as I was. Maybe because she seemed so genuinely accepting. Or maybe simply because she lived just a few minutes from the store where I was standing. I couldn't remember whether I spent a few more hours wandering or thinking, but eventually, she got out of bed to welcome me into her home at around 11 p.m. on a Friday night, made me some macaroni and cheese, and we half-watched Futurama while I poured my heart and soul out to her. Just after midnight, I got a call from my parents, furious that I wasn't home yet. I had been out past curfew, and boy, was I in trouble. I hugged this girl who had let me share the weight of my life with her, who had given me a safe place to run to when I had no happy places left, and who had so generously taken the time to talk me through the crap storm that was my life at the time. Then I went back into the grind. This all happened in 2006, and I am still trying to heal. I haven't had much time for recovery since then. It's been a rough 8 years, but I remember the date, I remember the emotions, and I remember Amy opening the door for me and inviting me into her living room as clearly as anything I have ever remembered. For someone like me, who usually only has crystal clear recall for the worst experiences of my life, I cannot describe how much that moment means to me. In my experience, when it comes to not ending one's life, the first time is always the hardest. I don't think I would have maintained that stores closed, go find help mentality for much longer than I did without her. I am beyond grateful that I found someone like her to turn to in that moment. I haven't really spoken to her since then, but if I ever get married, she will be the first person on my list of invitations, and I would even change the date to make sure she could attend. She is one of a very small group of people whose lives I care about, whose lives would not in any way be ruined if I had kept this experience quiet. I have told about 3 people, none of whom were deeply involved in my life at the time, and now I have shared it with the internet. Story 25. I have my own secret, one that, if revealed, could probably land me in jail for multiple counts of breaking and entering, and for turning someone's life completely upside down. During my senior year of high school, there was a guy in my class who was a total jerk. He treated women terribly, pushed heads into toilet bowls, and acted like a heartless bully. One particularly awful example was when he got a girl pregnant and pressured her into ending it. He did every terrible thing you could expect from an arrogant person, and then went even further. One day, this jerk began targeting me for no real reason. Every time I tried talking to a girl, he would make fun of me or try to make me look bad. I always acted calm, pretending his actions didn't affect me, but deep down, they did. I was always turned off by the idea of getting into a fist fight. He was mostly talk, and nearly anyone who really wanted to could probably have beaten the living daylights out of him. But I knew pain wasn't something that would faze him. I wanted to dig into his psyche and tear it to shreds, to make him feel the kind of slow unraveling that words alone couldn't cause. So one day, I sat in class, devising a plan to ruin his sanity. I closely tailed him over the next few months. I found out where his locker was, his address, what time he played football, and the grocery store where he worked. Basically, I watched him until I had his weekly routine memorized down to the tiniest detail. After those months of patient observation, phase 2 of my plan was ready to begin. So I bought a gnome. Why a gnome, you ask? Well, one day I made sure to leave school early so I could go over to the jerk's humble abode. I pulled up, looked around to make sure no one was home, and placed the gnome right on his front doorstep. He told people about the gnome the next day, but he was the jerk, so no one really cared or believed him. 2 days later, I arrived at school early, before the football team made their way outside. I knew I couldn't place a gnome in the middle of the 50-yard line because the whole team would see it. Luckily for me, he was too careless to remember more than one locker combination at once, so he always left his football locker unlocked with a rubber band. I slipped inside the locker room and placed a gnome on the top shelf of his locker. He told people about the gnome again, and this time, teachers began to worry about his mental health. The rest of his classmates thought he was just making it up. Another couple of days passed. I made my way to the grocery store where he worked. In a conversation earlier that year, he had accidentally mentioned that one of his first tasks every day was restocking the dairy shelves. Needless to say, I placed a gnome right behind the glass doors of the dairy aisle. Then one day at school, the hallway was empty, so I picked his main locker and left a gnome on the top shelf. His car window was rolled halfway down so the inside would not get too hot during the day, and I placed a gnome there as well. By this point, I was buying gnomes pretty frequently, just so I would always have one on hand if an opportunity presented itself. He didn't even mention the gnomes to people anymore. I figured out that the jerk kept a spare key under the air conditioner vent outside his home. So I decided to skip school one day and make my way inside. I placed 3 gnomes, one in the pantry, one in his bathroom, and one under the covers of his bed. A few days later, I heard he was starting to fail his classes. His parents even put up a security camera. I eventually found the blind spot and managed to dodge that thing completely. I also sent him a gnome for his birthday in the mail. He didn't show up to school much after that. His parents had enrolled him in a behavioral psychotherapy program. At that point, I didn't really think about why I even did it anymore. It had just become part of my daily routine. I even checked my statements once and found out that I had spent $150 on gnomes in the span of 2 months. But I didn't care. I had a good job, and it was well worth it. The school year ended, and after a whole summer of fun with my little project, I headed off to college. It was a happy and carefree time for me. The jerk wasn't so lucky. He didn't get into any schools because of his failing grades. He had to stay home and work at the grocery store to support himself. After the first semester, I decided to come back home for the holidays. I caught up with some friends, started talking, and enjoyed all the usual things. Eventually, someone told me that a former classmate had a panic attack and a breakdown in the middle of our local grocery store. Lo and behold, it was the jerk. Someone had stocked a gnome in the home and garden section. Story 26. Earlier this year, I met a girl at university. She was really lovely, but she had a boyfriend of 4 years whom she intended to marry. He went to a different school a couple of hours away. It wasn't how I planned things, but within a week, she had negotiated an open relationship with him. And shortly after, I began a relationship with her. We dated for about a month until she told me she couldn't continue without threatening her relationship with her boyfriend, so she ended things and returned to being exclusive with him. Somehow, though, we remained friends. One night, she came over, and I became an accessory to cheating. After some initial moral turmoil, we decided to just enjoy our last week together, continuing to betray her boyfriend during that time. She went home, and I went home, and now we are very far apart. I was talking to an acquaintance who attends the same university as her boyfriend, and he revealed that her boyfriend had been hooking up with one of his friends. When I asked him about it later, he backpedaled and denied everything. So it seems fairly plausible that her boyfriend has been cheating as well, especially now that she has told me he seems distant and unresponsive to her efforts to save their relationship. Of course, I cannot say anything to her, given my non-objective position. So, I cannot say that she cheated on him, and I cannot say that he cheated on her. But damn, I still want this girl. Even if it would take time to ever trust her again, I want her. Story 27. I was physically and psychologically abused by my mother's boyfriend for years. And at first, she did not know. The abuse ranged from physical to emotional by destroying the things my father would send me, since he lived far away. All intended to get a reaction out of me and justify punishing me. By the time I reached my mid-teens, around 14 to 15, I was always angry at home. Arguments with her occurred every day with constant shouting. I became skilled at patching holes in walls and repairing other damage, convinced I was going to end up either drugged out of my mind or hurting someone within months. Finally, one day, during an extremely intense argument with my mother, I let slip what had been happening. And she did not believe me. As a result of our intensifying arguments, she decided that I should live with him. I was forced to work for his company, a construction business, on weekends and occasionally after school. Then he would charge me for rent, utilities, food, and cost of living, so I never saw a single dime. I was not allowed to watch television, could not use the phone, had no computer, and was constantly cleaning. I began to loathe being at home even more than I did the bullies at school. I was barely a teenager, yet I found every excuse to stay at school longer, dreading the weekends. With no friends and no one to talk to, things were very bad. One Saturday, I refused to go to work for him. He became furious. I ran to my bedroom and barricaded the door with a dresser, a small bookshelf, and my cot of a bed. He broke the door in half, grabbed me by the arms, and threw me 6 feet into a wall. Then he knelt above me and began to put pressure on my neck until my vision started to fade. Eventually, he let go and said I had to fix this mess and that he would be back to pick me up for work in an hour. Then he proceeded to lock me outside, barefoot, without a coat, in the rain, as he left. It was like a scene from a bad freaking movie. I went downstairs to the tenant and banged on her door asking to be let in. She refused because she was afraid he would evict her. I told her she had heard the noise. Her living room was directly below my bedroom, and if she did not call for help, she would be as complicit as he was. She moved aside, so I broke down a door to get upstairs, then broke down his door to enter his room, and picked up the phone. I called my father, a police officer living 3,000 kilometers away, and, in tears, told him what had happened. He told me not to worry, that he would fix things. 15 minutes later, a significant matter, since everything was normally 30 minutes away, a local police officer arrived, picked me up, and brought me to my father's place. The cop was a friend of my father and acted on his instructions. Although my mother had custody, my father called and stated clearly that I was moving, and she had no choice. I moved in with him less than a week later, after 2 days of flights and a 1-day layover. The moment I hugged him, all the anger and tension melted away. So much weight gone. Things have been good since, but I will always remember the 3 years I lived with my father as the best of my life. He essentially kept a secret that could have ruined multiple lives, and even his career, before he retired, just so that I could live safely with him. He continued to pay my mother child support, despite not being able to attend court 3,000 kilometers away, and endured her behavior so that I could be protected. Even now, almost 10 years after leaving, my mother still does not believe me. I know this is a long post, but I do not think I have ever shared my whole story before. And even now, simply typing it lifts a weight I have carried for years. I am not sure if this experience has broken me, but during those days, I stopped crying. The last time I cried was at the funeral of a dear friend a year ago, and it had been years before that. I do not know if I now suppress emotion or if I simply do not feel it, but even after this happy ending, a tightness remains. A quiet reminder of everything that happened. A funny realization I had is that his construction company had some very large contracts at the time, like renovating a chain of gas stations during their rebranding. But the main work he had me do was on a massive, very expensive house, easily worth $600,000. They moved into that house together about 6 months after I left. The ironic part, to me, is that I helped build the house but never lived there. Meanwhile, I had 2 pairs of jeans practically falling apart and shirts full of holes. Yet I couldn't get new clothing, not even with all that child support. Child support. Story 28. It wasn't really that bad compared to some of the stories I've read, and it happened around winter 2006. I was working on a geography project with a girl, and as we spent time together, she began giving very obvious signs that she liked me. We went on what we called dates, spent time together, and collaborated closely on the project. I thought she was genuinely kind and very attractive. The only complication was that she had a long-term boyfriend back home. At first, this confused me, but I decided that since she seemed comfortable with our connection, I would see how far she wanted to take it. At that time, forming relationships of any kind was unusual for me, especially with the opposite gender. Eventually, I let her know that I liked her as well, and I attempted to kiss her. She immediately broke down crying. She admitted that she cared for me deeply, but was afraid to act because of her boyfriend. I told her it was okay with me as long as it was okay with her. She then experienced a full emotional breakdown, sobbing for hours. She had been feeling extremely lonely, being away from home for several years with few friends, craving companionship and comfort, but feeling trapped by her obligations to her boyfriend. I held her for several hours, letting her release everything she had been bottling up. As she calmed down, we moved to her place. She allowed a certain level of physical closeness, and we began talking playfully and intimately, sharing past experiences and personal preferences. However, she set clear boundaries: no full kisses on the lips, no touching inappropriate areas, and no removing of clothing, though she seemed to enjoy my playful attempts. During these conversations, I learned more about her boyfriend, to whom she was engaged. He was controlling and possessive, calling her multiple times every day while she was away at college, monitoring every detail of her life and restricting her interactions with male friends. His control had isolated her socially, and I could see how deeply it had affected her mental state. She insisted that things were more stable back home, despite his volatile temper when upset. Over the next 3 days, we grew extremely close, which coincided with the final days of our project. During that time, I overheard her take more than a dozen calls from her boyfriend, during which he verbally and emotionally abused her. I listened silently as he became upset over background noises or any pause in her responses. She deftly spun elaborate stories to appease him, fabricating details of her day to prevent conflict. Over time, I realized she had developed a remarkable ability to invent convincing explanations on the spot, a skill she applied just as naturally with teachers and supervisors. Forgotten reports, accidental tears in public, or any small emotional reaction could all be explained through precise, quick storytelling, a protective mechanism she had perfected to navigate a controlling environment. On the final day, she finally allowed me to kiss her properly. Over the past 3 days, we had spent somewhere around 20 to 30 hours together, holding hands and hugging constantly. When we began kissing, it felt as if a wall inside her had finally crumbled. She seemed free in a way I hadn't seen before. We kissed for 4 hours straight. By the second hour, her lips were chapped, but I felt too considerate to mention it. We even went out for food, only to return and continue kissing afterward. She made it clear that as long as nothing more intimate happened, it would not be considered a betrayal. I left each day frustrated by the intensity of our closeness, yet fully respecting her boundaries. She also confided that she had feelings for people of more than one gender, but her engagement and her boyfriend's controlling nature prevented her from exploring those feelings. After the project ended, I didn't see her much. She graduated, returned home, removed me from her social media, and eventually married her boyfriend. Since then, I have neither spoken to nor seen her. I've only shared this story with a handful of people who are completely disconnected from her. If her boyfriend ever discovered what had occurred, he might react violently toward her, pursue a divorce, and potentially try to harm me as well. Story 29. I was physically and psychologically abused by my mother's boyfriend for several years, and at first she had no idea. The abuse wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. He destroyed the things my father would send me, things that reminded me of him since he lived far away, just to provoke me. It was as if he wanted an excuse to hurt me. By the time I reached my mid-teens, around 14 or 15, home felt like a battlefield. Every day was filled with arguments, constant shouting, and an overwhelming sense of anger I couldn't escape. I became good at patching holes in the walls and repairing damage, marks of a life spent constantly fighting, both inside and outside. I was scared. I feared I would either drown in drugs or worse, hurt someone in a moment of rage. Then one day, during an intense argument with my mom, I broke. In a moment of vulnerability, I accidentally revealed what had been happening all along. I didn't intend to, but it slipped out, and everything changed after that. She didn't believe me. As our arguments became more frequent and intense, my mom made a decision that I never saw coming. She insisted I move in with him, the very person who had been hurting me. At his house, things only got worse. He forced me to work for his construction company every weekend and sometimes after school. Then he charged me for everything: rent, utilities, food, even living expenses. So, despite the endless hours I worked, I never saw a single penny. I wasn't allowed to watch TV, use the phone, or even access a computer. I spent my days cleaning and working, my entire existence reduced to nothing but labor and isolation. I began to despise being at home more than dealing with the bullies at school. At least at school there was a semblance of normalcy, even if it was painful. But home? Home was a prison. I would come up with any excuse I could to stay at school longer, to avoid facing him or the suffocating silence of the house. I was barely a teenager, yet I felt trapped, cut off from the world. With no friends and no one to talk to, life felt unbearably heavy. One Saturday, I refused to go to work for him. He became furious. I ran to my bedroom, barricaded the door with a dresser, a small bookshelf, and my cot. He broke the door in half, grabbed me by the arms, and threw me about 6 feet into a wall. He then positioned himself above me, choking me until I started to lose my vision, before letting go and telling me I had to fix the mess. He warned that he would return in an hour to take me to work. He left, locking me outside barefoot and without a coat in the rain, like something out of a bad movie. I ran downstairs to the tenant and knocked on her door, asking to be let in. She refused, afraid he would evict her. I told her she had heard the noise from her living room directly below my bedroom and hadn't called for help. I told her she could either move aside or be treated the same as him. She stepped aside, and I broke down the door to get upstairs, then forced open his bedroom door and grabbed the phone. I called my father, a police officer living 3,000 kilometers away, and explained to him through tears what had happened. He assured me not to worry and said he would fix things. About 15 minutes later, which was impressive considering everything was usually at least 30 minutes away, a local officer arrived, picked me up, and brought me to my father's place. I was set to move in with him in 2 days. The officer was a friend of my father's and had acted on his instructions. Although my mother had custody, my father called and made it clear that she had no choice. I was leaving. I moved in with him less than a week later, after 2 days of flying and 1 day of layovers. The moment I hugged him, all the anger and tension I'd been carrying melted away. It was like a weight had been lifted. Things have been good since then, but I will always remember those 3 years with my father as the best of my life. He essentially kept a secret that could have ruined multiple lives, including his own career, all so I could live safely with him. He continued to pay my mother child support, even though he couldn't attend court 3,000 kilometers away, and endured her behavior just to ensure I was protected. Even almost 10 years later, my mother still doesn't believe me. I'm not sure if that experience broke me, but during those years, I stopped crying. The last time I cried was at the funeral of a close friend a year ago, and it had been years before that. I don't know if I suppress my emotions now or if I just don't feel them, but even with the happy ending, that tension will always remain, a reminder of what happened. Story 30. My best friend's cousin and her older sister don't share the same biological father. The man who remarried their biological mom is not her real dad. To this day, she doesn't know the full truth about her family's dark secrets. My best friend, who's older, knows all the details of their mom's history. It's wild. She's got a crazy story, but it's too long to type out here. I'll share it if enough people ask. Anyway, her parents are extremely controlling, especially her mom. I feel like they brainwash her, not wanting her to grow up. She's 20. They're overprotective, the classic Asian parent type. School comes first, she can rarely stay out late, and she's almost never allowed to go anywhere alone. It's no surprise that she began feeling depressed. One day, she got into a huge fight with her mom and ran away. My friend went to pick her up, and they came over to hang out and vent about life. She went on about how difficult things had been living at home, how she struggled with it all, and then later she said, "Sometimes I feel like I was adopted." My best friend, not wanting to reveal the entire truth, told her cousin only part of it, that she didn't have the same father as her younger sister. My best friend knew the man. He was an old family friend, and their moms are sisters. Eventually, we found him on Facebook. She messaged him, and over the next few weeks, they chatted a bit. He even admitted that he was her biological father. They decided to meet at a Starbucks. My friend and I went with her to the location. At the last minute, though, she chickened out. She became hysterical, denying everything, having what looked like a mental breakdown. Her cousin ended up taking her back to the car and told me to go get water. I walked into Starbucks and saw him. He looked nervous but excited, semi-formally dressed, clean-cut, freshly shaved, and with a recent haircut. He had flowers and a gift. about the size of a shoebox, sitting there, looking at his phone, clearly waiting for her. He didn't know me, so I grabbed the water and went back to the car. We ended up leaving. I later followed up with my friend, and she told me that her cousin doesn't want to know the truth yet. She's afraid it will disrupt her current family. I heard that he tried to message her again on Facebook, but she told him to stop and leave her alone. My friend and I decided not to tell her that I had seen him there, waiting at Starbucks, with flowers and a present. My friend also told me that her mom and stepdad had taken her away from him years ago to run off and get married. There's a huge backstory behind that, which I also know, if anyone wants to hear it. I often think back to how happy and excited the father must have felt sitting in Starbucks, waiting to meet his daughter for the first time in so many years. I imagine him checking his phone over and over, rereading the messages from her, waiting for a text or call saying, "I'm here. Which one are you?" Now, when I think about it, the only life that seems to be negatively affected by keeping this secret is the father's. Story 31. I am a teenager whose parents are going through a divorce. My dad is a good man. He has worked for the last 25 years or so as the president of a business. He is in his mid-50s. My mom, on the other hand, is not so good. She has not worked since my parents got together and is in her mid-40s. The reason for the divorce is this. My mom is an alcoholic who left the house we had just moved into in October to live in the old unsold house. She primarily stayed there until January. The first time we, my brother, my mom, and I, planned to hang out, she was driven to our new house by her good friend, whom we will call Brett. This was not part of the plan, and we did not go with her. The next time, she came alone, and I went out for lunch with her, which did not go well. The final time my brother and I spent time with her was a sleepover, which also went poorly. I have not seen Brett since that first encounter. Sadly, my mom still maintains contact with my dad. I say sadly for two reasons. The first reason is that my mom acts kindly toward my dad only when she needs to. For example, she wanted to go to an expensive rehab center. She needed two things to make this happen. My dad would have to pay for it, and she needed someone to drive her to the airport and fly down to Florida with her. So my dad spent a whole Saturday doing this. She is still in rehab, but not for long. Let's go back a few months. I attend a Catholic school, despite being an atheist in a family of deists and agnostics, except for my mother, and I was forced to be confirmed. My mom said she would like to attend the ceremony. I said that would be great and suggested we could go out for dinner afterward if she insisted. However, she did not show up. I expected this and was not torn up by it, but I was angered by her excuse. She claimed that my dad forbade her from attending the service. This was not true. My dad had made plans and reservations at a nice place for my mom and me. She used a similar excuse about a week ago. She had planned to come to my graduation ceremony next week, but claimed that Dad's lawyers blocked me from going. I questioned my dad and took his word that he had done no such thing. It turns out my mom could not make it because she would not be out of rehab until the end of the week and simply could not return in time. My mom is playing my dad like a set of cards, and he keeps losing. The second reason, sadly, my dad continues personal contact with my mom is that it has affected me directly. About 2 months ago, my mom called my dad with bad news, which I overheard. It was not my dad's fault. It was late at night, and he most likely thought I was asleep. Brett, her good friend, had kicked her out of his house, where she had apparently been living. He had also been stealing from the family. We had a large safe at our old house with valuables such as rings and other items. Apparently, someone had stolen these items and then accessed my dad's bank account, taking most of the money. My dad managed to get the financial situation under control, but the valuables are forever lost. The worst part of the call confirmed something I had suspected when I first met Brett. He had been intimately involved with my mom. This made me sick. It would likely devastate my brother. My sister probably would not care, as she already despises my mom. This confirmation left me both sick and deeply disappointed in my mom. She had never been a great parent, consistently forgetting to cook meals and occasionally forgetting to pick us up from karate classes some 5 years ago. However, I never imagined she could do something like this. On the bright side, the divorce has shown me the true value of my childhood. I now realize how lucky I have been. previously oblivious to even the smallest details of my dad's incredibly stressful life. I am glad to know that I do not have to deal with that for a few more years. I have also adopted a philosophy inspired by an episode of Red vs. Blue. The part where Church explains to Carolina the importance of letting go struck me deeply. It changed how I approach my problems, and I must admit, it really kept me from falling into a terrible depression. I have enjoyed the series up to season 11, though seasons 11 and 12 have been lackluster compared to the previous 10. Never mind that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.